It was a beautiful day, and Peppa was working outside in her front garden. Then George came along and said, "Hey, that looks pretty interesting. What are you building?" Then Peppa replied, "I want to earn some money this summer so I can buy some new toys. So I've decided to open my own shop." And then she showed him her new sign. It said, "Peppa's Potty Stop." And then George said, "What kind of store is a potty stop?" So Peppa finished putting up her other signs, and then she told George, "I'm gonna charge people to use the toilet, so they don't have to walk around all day feeling uncomfortable." And then Peppa brought out a portable toilet and put it next to her store. "Now I'm open for business," said Peppa, and George replied, "Wow, I wish I thought of this idea. You're gonna make so much money." Well, it wasn't long before Peppa's first customer showed up. It was an officer from the Lemon Pie Land police force. And the policeman said, "I really have to go poo right now, but I won't be back at the station for hours." So Peppa replied, "No problem. You can use my potty for just $1. So the policeman climbed onto the toilet and began to take his poo. He pushed and pushed, but nothing was coming out. And after a while, Peppa realized that something was wrong. So Peppa brought the policeman a selection of magazines. And she said, "Reading can help relax your mind, and that's when the poo comes out the easiest." And the policeman said, "That's a really good idea." So he took a magazine and began to read. A short time later, he began to poo. And after he was done, Peppa came over and said, "Wow, your poo has a really strange color." And the policeman said, "Yeah, I've been eating a lot of junk food lately. Maybe that's why it's hard for me to take a poo sometimes." To finish things off, the policeman paid Peppa $1 for his poo. And then he went back to work. It wasn't long before Peppa's next customer showed up. It was Spider-Man. And Spider-Man said, "Wow, you're running a potty stop now? How convenient. I really have to go pee." Then Peppa said, "Sure, you can go pee in my potty for 50 cents. And Spider-Man said, "Great, I gotta go pee right away." So Spider-Man began taking his big pee. He had been holding it in all morning, so he really had to go. After he was done, Spider-Man paid Peppa his 50 cents and then said he had to get back to catching bad guys right away. So he said goodbye and took off. But when Peppa looked at her potty, she realized that Spider-Man had left a giant mess. He didn't even lift the toilet seat up. So Peppa went to get some cleaning supplies and began to clean up Spider-Man's pee. After she was done, the toilet was clean again and ready for another customer. And Peppa thought, running my own potty stop? It can be a lot of work. It was around lunchtime when Peppa's next customer came by. She was a nurse from the Lemon Pie Land Hospital. And the nurse said, "I'm on my lunch break, but I have to take a poo." And Peppa replied, "No problem. You can take a poo in my potty for $1. So the nurse agreed and began to take her poo. Well, it sounded like the nurse was taking a really big poo. And when she was wiping her bum, she was using a lot of toilet paper. And Peppa thought, I guess she really had to go poo. After the nurse finished up, she paid Peppa her $1 and then went back to her job. Then Peppa noticed that the toilet was making some strange noises. So she went over to investigate. And when she opened the lid, the toilet was still full of poos and toilet paper. So Peppa tried to flush the toilet a whole bunch of times, but nothing was working. The toilet was plugged. Then using her toilet plunger, Peppa tried to unplug the toilet. It took a lot of work, but eventually the toilet flushed. And Peppa took a step back and thought, running your own potty stop? It's a lot harder than it seems. Peppa was getting ready to close her potty stop for the day when George showed up. And George asked, "Did you have a lot of customers today?" And Peppa replied, "I've almost made enough money to buy the toy that I want." Then George said, "Can I use your potty?" And Peppa replied, "Of course you can. You're my brother." So George made his way over to the potty, lifted up the toilet seat, and began to take a big pee. After he was done, he flushed the toilet, put down the toilet seat, and then Peppa came around with her cleaning supplies. But to her surprise, she noticed that the toilet was still really clean. And she said, "George, you didn't make a mess this time." And George replied, "Yeah, I've been doing a lot of toilet training recently, and sometimes I can go pee without splashing everywhere." And then George reached into his pocket and gave Peppa 50 cents. And he said, "I know you weren't going to charge me, but you've been working so hard today. You deserve it." And Peppa said, "Thanks, George. Now I can afford the toy that I want." What toy would you like to see Peppa Pig buy? If you have a suggestion, let me know in the comments below, and you just might see it in a future episode. It was a beautiful day, and Mummy Pig was outside doing her gardening work. And then Peppa and George came outside with their new toy dolls. So then Mummy Pig said, "I'm going back inside to cook us some lunch. You two play out here, but don't make a mess in my garden, okay?" Then she picked some fresh vegetables and went inside. Peppa had a Spider-Man toy, and George had his new toy dinosaur. Then Peppa said, "Superheroes are super strong. I wonder if they're even stronger than dinosaurs." And George replied, "No way! Dinosaurs are even stronger than superheroes, and mine even breathes fire." Then Peppa said, "Maybe you're thinking of dragons." But then suddenly, Peppa felt like she had to use the bathroom. So she put down her Spider-Man toy and went back into the house to take a pee. George went over to take a closer look at Spider-Man. Then he set down his dinosaur and thought, "I wonder which one would win in a fight." To be honest, they both look pretty strong. Then he turned around to take another look at his dinosaur. But when he did, it was missing. And then he heard a rumbling in the bushes. And out came his toy dinosaur. But this time it was real. And the dinosaur said, "George, of course I'm stronger than superheroes. Look at me, I'm huge." And then he let out a mighty roar. Then he took a step back to look at the Spider-Man doll, but it too was missing. And then, out of the bushes, the real Spider-Man appeared. Then Spider-Man said, "I'm a trained superhero with mutant spider powers. There's no way an old dinosaur can beat me." Well, the dinosaur didn't like what he was hearing, so he moved over and said, "Spider-Man, if you think you're the strongest, then let's have a battle right here in this garden." And then George moved in to say, Guys, this is Mummy's garden. If you're gonna fight, just make sure you don't break anything, okay?" Then the dinosaur said to George, "I'm gonna prove you right, that dinosaurs are stronger than superheroes." So George gave him a high five and wished him luck. The dinosaur started the fight by unleashing a tremendous roar. And then he used his giant tail to whack Spider-Man around. Spider-Man was impressed by the dinosaur's power, but he had some tricks of his own. He began to shoot spider webs at the dinosaur, hoping to catch him. And when he did, the dinosaur had a really hard time breaking free. Eventually, the dinosaur broke free and even complimented Spider-Man on his amazing skill. But the dinosaur had a final trick up his sleeve. He could breathe fire. And Spider-Man yelled, "Ow, that's really hot! Good thing I'm wearing this superhero suit, or I'd be burnt to a crisp." And then he moved in closer to say, "I think we've taken this challenge far enough. Dinosaurs are really strong." And the dinosaur replied, "Your web shooting skills are great. You really got me this time. In fact, I can't seem to get this spider web off of my head. Can you lend me a hand?" So Spider-Man used his special gloves to pick the spider web out of the dinosaur's hair. And then he said, "Man, this superhero costume is really tight. It always makes me want to use the bathroom." So Spider-Man went over to Mummy Pig's garden and began to take a pee. And George said, "Spider-Man, you can't take a pee in Mummy's garden. You gotta go in the house and use the toilet." Spider-Man replied, "Sorry, I can't wait. And isn't your sister Peppa using the toilet right now?" After Spider-Man was done, he said, "Well, I'd better get back to fighting crime in Lemon Pie Land. See you guys next time." And he left the garden. And then George thought, "What am I going to do about this mess in the garden? Maybe I can ask the dinosaur to help me clean it up." But when he looked back, the dinosaur was also taking a pee. And the dinosaur said, "Sorry, George, I just really had to go pee. And besides, your sister's probably still using the toilet." And then the dinosaur left the garden. So George was left alone in the garden, which was now covered in pee. And then Peppa showed up. Peppa looked at the garden and said, "George, you peed all over the place. Mummy's gonna be so upset with you." And George exclaimed, "Spider-Man and the dinosaur became real, and they're the ones that peed in the garden." But when George took a step back, the dolls were normal again, and they were exactly where he left them. So Peppa said, "Come on, George, I'll help you clean up your mess, and Mummy doesn't have to know about a thing." Peppa and George cleaned up all the Play-Doh pee until Mummy's garden was clean again. And then Peppa said, "George, if the toilet is busy and you really have to go pee outside, just don't take a pee in someone's garden, okay?" And then they went inside to eat lunch.